Back for another episode. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Sage Franch and Scott McCleskey. Our longtime Deep Prax listeners will remember Scott from a podcast many moons ago, but he's back with Sage to talk about a new venture they have going on. So, guys, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Sage, could you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about your professional background?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Sage Franch. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rulebook. I've been in the business of AI for the last decade or so. I've worked across a number of different industries, working on driving business outcomes with AI and digital transformation. So working with some of the largest organizations all the way down to brand new startups. And really the work that I've done has centered on driving business growth and organizational resiliency by leveraging the new technologies and technological advancements as part of a core strategy which targets specific business objectives. So it's ranged from everything from supporting athletes in their work through to charities, all the way up to large retail organizations who are looking at transforming their strategy and targeting new markets and expanding that through the power of really analyzing big data and using AI within the organization. So that's kind of the center of all of it. I spent a number of years at Microsoft working in conversational AI, bringing to market some of those technologies across North America, and then spent a good number of years also developing some AI software in the space of organizational behavior change and driving highly resilient team growth through mid to large scale organizations. And so that's a bit about me.
And Scott, could you reintroduce yourself to the audience and tell us what you've been up to and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. I'm currently a member of the board of advisors of Rulebook, and my background is 30 plus years in the industry, mostly in compliance and regulatory roles. Uh, Most of it in the United States, but I spent 8 years in Europe in various functions as well. I advised governments around the world on regulatory and financial crime matters. Most of my time spent in compliance. I've been a chief compliance officer at the global level. I've done some specialized things as well, a lot of training roles. And perhaps one of the things that's more germane here is I ran the regulatory intelligence team globally at Thomson Reuters for a number of years, and in particular, right after the financial crash of 2008. We're to the point where we have to number our financial crises. But, that's given me a lot of insight into a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
I would also probably opine, Scott, that you're old enough that you can number your financial crises because I can do the same.
I have to name the century. Yeah.
Let me turn over to the sort of the current state of the complexity and cost of regulatory compliance, and maybe not even the cost at this point, certainly the complexity. And Sage, for yourself, how is navigating this? How has it become so complex? And that, of course, is going to lead to how can this process be actually refined down for the compliance professional today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the listeners who are tuning into this will all feel this problem on a very deep level. Every single organization has to follow regulatory requirements, but doing it is so complex. And it's because there's so much to handle and so little time. There's hundreds of different regulatory authorities. They're publishing thousands of different updates. And it's really up to the compliance practitioners to figure out which ones of these apply to my organization, analyze how do they actually apply, and then figure out and design a solution to keep their organization compliant. And because the regulatory landscape is shifting so often, it has to be done on an ongoing basis. But it's hard to keep up to date with all of the changes that come out. You can't simply just pick a subset of regs to follow or bodies to follow. You have to really be aware of the entire thing as it shifts. That you need specialized knowledge to integrate certain changes or to analyze certain new developments that are coming out and figure out how do we as an organization have to adjust to stay on board. And the volume of work alone is just a huge challenge. People aren't designed to handle that volume of information. We really can't. And so that's where that complexity and that expensiveness comes in. In order to actually be able to handle all of the things we need to handle, you would have to really engage so many people to be able to do that. And most organizations just simply don't have the capacity for that. So things get missed. What happens is we'll end up making trade-offs or deciding we have to follow the most urgent path right now. And then that's where we leave room for things to grow and these things get dropped and big issues can rear their ugly heads down the line.
And Scott, from your perspective, having been on the front lines of this for so long as a compliance professional, whether it's in anti-bribery, anti-corruption, whether it's in anti-money laundering, whether it's in export controls and trade sanctions, or really any other type of regulatory environment, are compliance professionals being asked to look at sort of an enterprise risk level of all of these risks and give an opinion, or are we still too siloed at this point?
I think ultimately, in practice, we're still siloed. There is an expectation that there'll be, particularly from the Federal Reserve, from my own recent experience, that there is an overarching approach that looks at all of these things because you have to take a look at where your greatest risks are. And they may be in one area or not another. And I think that really is something that rears its ugly head when you're thinking about things like keeping up with regulatory change. The regulatory environment is changing, but so is your business. And so it's a bit of you're shooting at a moving target from a moving platform. And because there's so many different things that you need to look at, it's a very fragmented range of sources you're looking at. Sage mentioned you may have different people looking at things. If you don't have one person looking at everything, then there's a lot of things that get dropped in the handoffs. You're adding another layer of complexity, which is the people talking to your people about what they need to talk about. And so that's one of the things that I think we'll get to is that with artificial intelligence, there's a little bit more capacity to break things into one source and look at them together. So that going back to your question, you're looking at your different silos, but you can do it in a holistic approach.
And Sage, that really leads to a couple of areas I want to explore with you. And frankly, I wasn't aware of your extensive background at Microsoft into AI. So let me start with misconceptions about AI. And I love this question, particularly to someone like yourself who's not a compliance professional, because you've been dealing with this for so long. And whether it's Pinocchio's nose growing all the way to when I started practice of law, we had LexisNexis Legal Research, literally up until today. What are some of the common misconceptions you hear literally in October 2024?
About AI,
Yes.
I think that people have this feeling that AI is going to overnight come and take on all of the tasks that people do, but it's just not true. It's not a silver bullet solution. If we're taking it like that, if we're trying to say, hey, we want to adopt AI in the organization because it's going to completely replace the need for entire departments or teams or people, that's not the right approach. In fact, that's a highly risky approach to take. People seem to think that AI is very far advanced. It's close to AGI, and we may be there, but it's not to the point that a lot of people expect it to be. We're still in a very nascent era for adoption of AI and actual practical use of AI, especially in a business setting. It's not enough to just plug in an LLM and say, okay, I'm going to bring this AI capability here and all my problems will be solved. You really need to get into thinking of it like you're hiring people. Like when you hire someone, you don't just hire any person because they're a smart person who has an education or who has recently done some work in the space. You really have to look at, are they going to be able to do the specific task, specific job that I need to fill right now? You have to take AI the same way. You really have to look at what is the capability of this particular AI solution. Does it advance what I'm trying to do here? Can it help me to get more information and solve a problem or make a decision in a more well-rounded way? And with AI, because a lot of the time it's a black box, you have to consider things like, can I actually do this? Can I use this in a way that is safe and secure for my people and my organization? So people think you can just plug and play with AI, but most of the times that's not the case. You really have to put a lot more thought into understanding the solution you're bringing in and finding something that really fits the problem you're trying to solve.
Let me focus on a word I think I heard you use, but it really struck me as critical, which is support. That AI can support compliance or other professionals, but how can AI support a compliance professional if that's the right question to ask?
Yeah. So I think that the way that, especially here at Rulebook, what we think is AI is there to augment human capability. It's not there to replace it. AI is able to process huge volumes of information in seconds or milliseconds, which is really the biggest advantage that you have as a person using AI. And you should always take it with that kind of approach. I'm going to use AI. I'm not going to delegate everything to AI. I'm going to use it to make me faster, make me able to do my job better, make me able to have a higher degree of confidence in the decisions that I'm making. The way that works and the way that AI can support, especially in the compliance space, is think about the regulatory information we've just discussed. There's so much of it, hundreds of regulatory bodies, thousands of updates. That is big data. That's huge volumes of information. And the AI can actually process that amount of information in a short amount of time. So rather than trying to, as a compliance practitioner, do that all yourself, you can delegate some of those parts that are much harder for a person to do. And then at the point of the decision making part of the process, take that back on yourself and say, okay, now I have all of the information. Now I have all of the options laid out for me because it was assisted by this AI assistant or whatever we're using. And now I can actually make a more confident decision because I have more information and a lot of this work has been done in a shorter amount of time. If you were to replicate that on your own with no AI, you could potentially still get to that, but it would take you months to have that same analysis, which slows everything down and it's just not feasible.
Scott, let me change the focus of your a little bit to the board of directors. As difficult as the compliance professional's job is, boards are struggling with how do we fulfill our obligation, not management, but oversight. If you were brought in by a board, basically say, Scott, how do we manage AI? What's our role in this? How would you counsel them at this point?
I think you need to start with understanding what AI does and does not do. And a lot of what that's about is what Sage just mentioned, to make sure that the people understand, the people that are making decisions understand that AI is there to support decision making, not to make the decisions. And I think just like we saw with emerging technologies before, the board and senior management need to understand the limitations. A big part of that is the data. And so if you got bad data coming in and just put AI on top of these bad processes, all that means is you're going to waste time faster than you used to. It's not going to be garbage in, data out. It's going to be really well organized data out. Just from the board point of view, I'd want to make sure that we're not just putting in the black box and saying we're going to make bad decisions faster. So I think that's part of it. I think also there needs to be a recognition at all levels that AI is here to stay. And I'll be the first to tell you, I came to AI as a skeptic. We've all heard these things before, but the more that I've seen what it does, and specifically with respect to compliance, the more I see this is something like the internet was in the 90s. This is something that's not going away, and we won't be able to picture how our processes are done without AI in a few years. So yeah, I think from the board point of view, making sure that it is something that's looked at as part of a process, which requires good data, make sure that people are taking advantage of it so that the collaborative aspects of AI are being taken advantage of. I think those are the main things that I would look at if I was, recommending something to the board.
So let me turn now to Rulebook AI and ask let me start with the phrase, which I love, the human in the loop. And I don't know if that's the phrase you use, but that's the one that has been told to me several times. And how does Rulebook really help augment the human in the loop of the compliance professional?
So, human in the loop is absolutely the right term to use. It's the notion of making sure that the person who is bringing in the AI or using the AI to do something is actually the one who's saying, hey, we're going to do this or that. We're going to make the decision here. At Rulebook, that is core to the way that we've developed everything that we're doing. So we have a suite of products, and each one is really designed to, again, take those more time consuming, data heavy or analysis heavy parts and accelerate that so that we can present the practitioner with a set of options, a set of pathways and analysis that they can then make an informed decision on or a better informed decision on. So think about, when you are, I'll use the example of Regify, which is one of our products. It's a search, discovery, and reasoning engine for regulations. It's kind of like a research assistant. So you can ask it a question. You can say, hey, in just plain language, help me understand this regulatory update or help me understand and analyze the trade-offs between A and B. And what it does is it actually will go in and pull in directly from the regulatory authorities, really the original source text, analyze thousands of different documents at once, do a synthesis for you, and then produce a well-researched report with all of the citations. So that what you have is essentially this research that you can then have, first of all, faith that it's got all of the sources that it needs to have confidence that you haven't missed anything that you might not have been aware of not knowing. And then from that point forward, use that as a basis for making decisions or use that to augment the types of processes you have in place. The human in the loop part is saying, okay, now as the person, I have more information to make a decision with. I'm going to be able to take that forward and have a more complete perspective and a more rounded decision made at the end of the day. We have a few different ways that we bring this out to. Another area that we've done this is in Policy Protect, which is our product for scanning compliance policies and keeping them up to date with the regulatory changes. And what that does is when it notices that there's a change that affects your policy, it'll share that with you. It'll say, hey, proactively, here's the change that's coming. Here's the time frame that you need to make a change in. And here's the way that this change affects this policy as well as the others in your organization. It provides them then with a set of options. Would you like to generate a draft? Would you like to create something here to fill that gap? Would you like to review this set of policies that are all interconnected and take it forward in this way? And because we give that choice to the practitioner, they're the ones who are ultimately in control. And that's really critical at this era of AI.
Scott, how would you see this helping, or if you were the compliance professional, how does this help you on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's a real, among other things, it's a real time saver. So, you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper in many cases. And that's not just when I'm doing something as a compliance officer. But a lot of times I'm dependent on other people. And I'll take my experience running training as an example. You need to get the SME to provide you content for training. And I've been that SME as well. And it's a pain in the neck. You're staring at a blank sheet of paper. If you can start with something that's well researched and say, here's what we've got so far. Can you edit this? Then what may have taken 2 months to get out of an SME may take a day. So that's just one very concrete example. I think there's also the potential to use AI to break a lot of silos with more collaborative way. Taking Policy Protect as an example. So you see that there's a change that's coming in that affects a particular policy. With AI, you can also have a better insight into who needs to know about this, which trading desks or which geographic areas may need to be alerted to this. I'd also use it to supercharge my risk management so that as a lot of firms will do their compliance risk assessment once a year. They'll update it maybe once a quarter. You can almost do this in real time. You can do this in real time with AI if you've got it scanning the horizon for you, taking a look at, let's say, enforcement actions. Now, all of a sudden, something that was a medium risk and carried as such in your policies and in your compliance risk assessment is coming to be more and more of an issue. And so that can be flagged, and it can be flagged in your policies, flagged in your training. So it just makes you a lot more well connected to what's going on, and you're finding things out much faster, and you're able to communicate them more efficiently.
Does it also really help in focusing not simply on the retrospective or the reactive part, but maybe even moving to a preventative or proactive style that you can incorporate going forward, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. And regulatory intelligence is that's what regulatory intelligence is all about, so that you're aware of emerging threats, whether it's a new rule or trends and enforcement actions ahead of time, so that by the time the change is in place and it's a high risk, you've already anticipated it. And I think there's also another aspect to this, which is there are a lot of processes out there that I won't say we put them at the too difficult box, but they've been very complex. Things like ultimate beneficial ownership, things like trade-based money laundering, things at the regulatory level like spotting systemic risk, which I think we could start to lean into a little bit more. And by doing that, we could start to say we've got some risks that we didn't know about.
Sage, that seems like a great point that Scott raised, which is this proactive or preventative prong that many compliance professionals feel will be the next level of compliance, not simply detecting and remediating, but actually preventing before it gets us to those points. How does the tools you have really help us move to that prevent prong?
Mm. Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. I think that this is where the space is going in a big way. And I might even take it a little bit further than that, not just looking at preventative, but actually turning compliance into a competitive advantage, turning compliance into a driver for business growth and a driver for those business outcomes. When I think about our place as Rulebook and the things that we're aiming to do here, our objective is to democratize regulatory information and just make it easy for people to find the information, analyze it, and take action on it. The inspiration for somebody doing that may come from different angles, different points within the business, different trigger points for that to come up. But at the end of it, under the hood is what's the game changer of what makes that possible and kind of why we're able to do this today versus 10 years ago when it wasn't possible. When we look at trying to get into a more proactive stance, the big challenge comes back to finding information, analyzing it. And up until now, one of the reasons it's been so difficult to do that is all of those regulatory authorities, they're publishing things that look very different from one another. A person has to really sit down and analyze each document separately and look at the context for each individual one. There's no uniformity across these different spaces. There's no kind of generally agreed upon format for these updates. And so that for a person is very complex. For a machine, it's also very complex. But what we've done here at Rulebook is under the hood of all of our technology, we've built a set of, we call it our knowledge cluster builders, and they're able to tap in and actually analyze all of those differently formatted things. And I'm simplifying this for the sake of the conversation, but take things that look very different, things that don't typically talk to one another, and draw those inferences, draw those connections. So under the hood of Rulebook's engines, it's actually able to make those different elements talk, find the relationships between different regulations, even find the relationships between those and the organization's own policies and compliance controls. And when you have that, you have a living map that's constantly evolving as the regulatory landscape shifts, as your business shifts, and as decisions get made across all of these different components. And what that does is it allows you to, at any point in time, have that instant map of how all these things fit together. So you can make a decision or you can analyze, hey, last time things looked like this is what happened. That's where we get into the predictive and the proactive. We can start to see how patterns form over time and start to look at, on a very big scale, how different shifts and almost butterfly effects across the big web can actually cause things to happen.
If I can just jump in very briefly on that point, I think there's a very important point here about all the context and the relationships. And this is something I learned when I was doing regulatory intelligence before. Each of the different jurisdictions you're looking at is its own environment. And so you're looking at the insurance regulation for Papua New Guinea, and it's making references to other things. And you need to know the whole regulatory environment in Papua New Guinea. I worked for a number of years in the EU, and you may have an EU-wide directive, but the implementation is quite different. And you need to know what happened before. You need to know what other regulations they have. And in the old days, you'd say, okay, here's the regulation for whatever, for Sweden. And you're looking at it and it's okay, and I see what it says. But with AI, you can start to know a little bit more about the environment, what enforcement actions have been taken, which sections of this, what is that law that it's making reference to, what is the status of a particular country, is it part of the EU, is it part of the EFTA, how are things enforced? All that was a real challenge before. That's one of the key things I think AI can do.
Yeah, I would actually love to add on to that a little bit more too, because this brings me back to something you said earlier, Scott, about the importance of the data sources, the importance of having the right information when you're dealing with that volume of worldwide. This is a huge thing. That where the information comes from, the data provenance becomes critical to this whole thing working. As soon as you have an untrustworthy source, or as soon as you have something that is based on opinion rather than fact, or introduces uncertainty into the system, the whole thing weakens. And so that's at Rulebook, a core tenet of what we're doing is making sure that all of the sources that are going into the AI that we're building, it's all from trusted authorities. It's exclusively within this context. And we've actually built in safeguards and we've built in layers to our products where we're actually specializing this specifically for the regulatory context. So our AI understands these different concepts, understands how they fit together, and it's able to intelligently analyze in this particular arena rather than just taking kind of an out of the box LLM or something like that, where you are opening yourself up to a lot of risk by introducing unknown sources, introducing black box decision making, and not being able to trace how all of those things fit together.
Sage, let me ask you from your perspective as the creator, as your perspective as someone who's been in the AI field for some time, what is going to be the next iteration of maybe rule book or where one of these tools will go for the compliance professional? And then Scott, I'm going to ask you the same question, but from the compliance professional's perspective. So what do you think, Sage?
So, from the AI and business growth perspective, I think that AI capabilities are becoming more and more powerful. I think it's clear that today we have not just the AI that we've been looking at over the last couple decades, but really we've entered a new era where AI is almost able to play in the same space as people. Like it can write, it can create, it can produce text, it can produce even audio and video. So, in general, in the space, you're going to see a lot more of that kind of stuff pop up. But I think the real crux of solving problems with this comes back to being able to augment people's abilities to do this. So think about the things that as a compliance practitioner feel very heavy, feel very painful, feel like they take a lot of time or require a lot of people to come into one space and collaborate on. Those are going to be the pieces that we are accelerating. And that's what we're focusing on here at Rulebook. So with Policy Protect, for example, that complexity of analyzing your policies or keeping your policies up to date, it doesn't have to be such a heavy process. It doesn't have to take so much time and involve so many people from across the business to come in and take months of effort to make this happen. It can be something that is done ongoing and actually is done in a way that supports everything else across your compliance program. Similarly, on Regify side, if you are up against a particularly complex regulatory challenge, you don't have to spend months or hours or weeks or a long and painful process trying to find all of the sources and pull all of that together. I think it's going to be kind of like an evolution of superpowers almost for compliance folks. And that's what we're certainly trying to do here at Rulebook. And I think you'll see a lot more development of that soon.
Scott?
So three things come to my mind. One is very specific. That's in the AML space. There's been a lot of work done over the past few years, specifically on a very big issue, which is the number of false positives. And that's where I think, really proved itself in the beginning to vastly reduce the number of false positives. But I think that there's other things, other issues within the financial crime space that it can start to expand into. I mentioned ultimate beneficial ownership, correspondent banking risk, supply chains, and things like that. So that's one very specific area. More broadly within compliance, I think the next step is going to be to move from using AI to address specific compliance issues. How up to date are your policies? Are your trainings matching the regulatory requirements? So those specific issues, I think it's going to move up now to the risk management level. We say, okay, we're tying all this across. Now let's take a look at where our risks are from a holistic point of view. Doing a good compliance risk assessment takes a very long time, and a lot of it is still kind of, is it a 1, a 2, or a 3? Is it a high, medium, or a low? I think this can get a lot more precise and a lot more usable with AI, bringing it up a level to enterprise-wide risk management. The third thing I think I'd love to see, and maybe it's happening, is the regulators start to get on board with what they need. I mentioned systemic risk, and one of the problems that we've had in many of our financial crises is we're not spotting where the concentrations are, the concentrations of risk. We're not doing the traffic analysis so we can see where the ties are. And systemic risk isn't about a big bank failing. It's about a big bank that's tied into the network failing, and nobody knows exactly where all those connections are. And I think AI can be used to really spot your concentration risks. Is there one firm writing all the credit default swaps? Is there one firm that's writing all the loans for people to buy new credit transfer risk? So I'd like to see this start to be used by the regulators to take a look not at individual firms or individual silos within firms, but across the system.
Guys, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But Sage, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you or get any information about Rulebook of the other companies you've named, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
So our website, you can visit us at rulebook.ai. We're also Rulebook across all of the social media channels. And I would personally be happy to connect with anyone who's listening and continue the conversation. I think that now, especially, everyone has a lot of questions about AI. People are curious about how can I be part of this? And I'm always happy to have that conversation with folks who want to have it. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me at sage@rulebook.ai.
And Scott, how about you?
And the best way is through LinkedIn or getting in touch through Rulebook as well, Rulebook AI.
Guys, this has been a great episode. I have lots of follow ups, and we're going to be talking down the road.
Thanks so much for having us talk.